Hi, everybody. This is Travis with the Berm Show. This is a podcast where active duty military members and veterans can share their stories, their experiences transitioning from active duty military life into that of a veteran. So please follow, subscribe. Thank you. An office doesn't exist anymore. I'm in the corner of the basement every time I do one of these things. It's like those days are gone. I was like, man, this sucks,
There
Got
is
this
no
really,
office.
yeah, we got this really nice desk and everything in there, and that's
Yeah.
built into the closet that we can't use anymore. But it's like that.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm excited to have you on. Everybody, we have Dr. Pam from PTSD Unplugged, which is obviously a huge topic amongst veterans, and I'm sure other groups as well that we can get
Yeah.
into.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I just want to start off with a little introduction, a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, this is how I introduce myself in VA benefits exams. So that's what I've been doing for a living. I'm Dr. Hall. I'm a forensic and clinical psychologist. So I've been in mental health since the 80s, actually. So I've earned every one of, like they say. Um, of course, I colored for a long time, but at 50, I went gray, because just cause I was tired of sitting in the colorist chair, actually. So on the personal side, but also right around 50, I started doing these. I started doing VA exams for QTC management, which, if you're a veteran and you've had a an examination for service connection, you might have had it through QTC management. They've been doing that work for like 50 years. I've been with them since 2008. So at some point, the VA made a shift from doing these exams in-house to doing them through contractors. So we're a non-government contractor, or QTC is. I'm an independent contractor with them. That's what I do for a living. So my brief backstory is that I got involved in mental health uh, as a young person in 1981. I started my first graduate degree. I eventually got 3 of them. But I spent the first 8 years of my career working with head injury and sort of brain trauma. So that was because that was the job that was available. And I was fascinated, actually. We called it the brain behavior relationship then. Now it's called neuropsychology. So, I mean, we called it that then too, but anyway, the naming of things, you have to keep up. In the 90s, uh, I worked on and finished my doctorate. And that's when I worked with veterans for the first time, 95 to 96 at Sepulveda VA in California. I still live really near that VA here. I chose an internship at the VA as opposed to like a primary medical setting because I particularly wanted to work with veterans. And so while I was there, I worked in head trauma, chronic pain, and PTSD. Sort of, the trifecta for you guys. God, I don't know why you would choose this job. So
Yeah, that's true.
it's like, yeah, let me go hit my head against that wall. Yeah, sounds good. A whole bunch of y'all go run at a wall together for a while. So anyway, I'm very aware of really the tough work you do. So, I thank you for your service. I spent the late 90s and all the way through the 2000s trying to find veterans present what I was doing in a private practice to veterans. And you know what? I found that veterans don't like shrinks very much. So, so that didn't
Oh
work
yeah.
out. Right?
Well, I
Uh,
think most veterans are like hesitant to even just share like
yeah.
anything with anybody, for the most
I
part.
think y'all are. Look, so I have a good friend now on Instagram, John Archambaugh, who wrote a book called Operation Wired Differently. And I completely respect that, talking about feelings is sort of the last thing. It's like, if I have like 3 beers, I will talk to you about my feelings. But,
Yeah, it comes out in like the worst
yes,
possible ways.
yeah,
It's a lot of like like negative impacting yourself negatively, and that's how those things come
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
it's funny. It's talking to. I had a guy on before that was in the army, and he had said, you know, part of it's maybe because how you're conditioned in boot camp, and once you get to wherever you're going, you're not supposed to show emotion or express how you feel. So it's hard to come home and do the opposite of what you've been trained to do. And unfortunately, I think that's why, like you said, a lot of veterans go to the bottle, and then that's when it all comes out, and it's just a hot mess. I've done it personally, So, and I can
I
only
think we
imagine.
all have done that,
Oh yeah,
and if you're a person who holds their feelings close to your chest, that's okay with me. So, like, just as a way of, I'm getting a little comfortable. Sorry, little messages being covering up your handsome beard,
oh,
So
thank you.
you can decide how to edit this, but I think what has kept me uh, in 2008, I started doing these VA benefits exams. In big part because I had been I enjoy doing psychological testing and examination, like that process of uh, getting to know somebody in that way and being able to provide information that could help everybody get on the same page, has been something that I've been like doing all of my career. So when QTC and I kind of found out about each other, it was a really good mix. So since then, I've done 8,500 examinations.
Holy
I know
cow,
that's just called going to work for 15 years. So it's a lot.
that's yeah, that's a lot.
But, it's like it's this eyeball to eyeball conversation in a little room in a clinic. And where guys and gals talk about stuff that they don't talk about anywhere else. So now they're talking about it because there's, they filed a claim for mental health symptoms, and I feel really honored to do the job. And so I've learned a lot about military service and what it is to transition from service to civilian life, and just these things from the view of 8,500 veterans.
Yeah.
So I asked my assistant Jessica, who's awesome, does all my social media, to count the numbers again, but at the end of 22, so you can take that number to the bank. So she she just has been keeping up on counting numbers, because at some point it's a lot to absorb. And the stuff that I was hearing in those appointments is what brought me out onto social media. So
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder then. So, since you've been doing it for so long, when you first started, or even now, is there times where you hear these stories that they're sharing with you, and does it like, how does it hit you initially, or even when you first started doing it? Is it like traumatizing for you, even to like experience their stories in some sense?
well, life moves one day at a time. So
Hmm.
as you all know, going in and doing the tough jobs that you do, you don't start off uh, being able to manage it like 100% or terrifically. But coming into that job, I had been working as a licensed psychologist in a community-based practice for a bunch of years. I had been doing domestic violence work
Yeah.
with both the so I'd been providing and managing a anger management program, which in the state of California is mandated if there's a conviction of domestic violence. So I've been
Okay.
talking to guys for a long time about how it is for them in relationships and providing training that makes sense to guys. We'll
Mhm.
just say, some of the work I did with that was with females, but I was mostly working, uh, with the guys, and had a team of people, and we all were working with that program. So coming into doing this job, I'd already developed a certain way of being in my job that allowed me to, and I'm a certain kind of person, so like you all will say, I'm not much of a crier, and I'm like, yeah, I know that. So what, neither am I. So now, when you all get choked up a little bit and that, one tear that in the eye, that's kind of how I respond to things too. So just like disposition wise, it seemed to be a good match.
Mhm.
And I learned over time how to ask the questions for people to say what they needed to say in the exams. And so to circle back to the question, does it traumatize me? Over the years, I'd say between '08 and 2013, I knew that I either had to learn how to come home and be okay, or only do this job for a short period of time, because it
Wow.
is a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I mean, just the few or the number of veterans I've even talked to, they've had far worse experiences than I had. I was in the Navy, so my experiences aren't boots on the ground or losing anybody. And I
Right.
hear those stories, and there's been times even just talking to him on a podcast episode where I've got choked up because it's new to me. I mean, you hear these stories,
Yeah.
on the news and stuff, but to actually hear it from somebody who's lived it, and sometimes it's the first time they've even talked about it. I'm like, oh, that's crazy. You picked this time to do it, and I've not prepared for it.
Yeah.
And I've gotten off and told my wife, like, man, I'm like choked up. I'm about to cry. This guy's brother or sister, husband, lost their lives, committed suicide when they got home,
Mm. Mm.
and the guilt that they feel, even it's like I kudos to you to be able to do that for 8,500 people, because I don't know
Right.
how you do
So
that.
like in 2013, I actually, I hate to date these things, but so, because that was 9, 10 years ago now, because I think people want to know, what is it
Mhm.
like to be a benefits examiner? I have not gotten burned out or in 2013, I started thinking, oh, I'm kind of like the exploratory surgeon,
Mhm.
and literally this was my process. And I would talk about this with my people who support me, because everybody needs more. I don't stand alone. I got people. So I talked about this with my people, and I said, is this just BS, or could this actually be true? Is this am I just trying to talk myself into something? So, I started thinking of myself as like an exploratory surgeon. I'm the one that like opens it up and goes, well, that doesn't look very good. Or,
Mm.
or that doesn't look too bad. And, somewhere in that range. And then close it up and send people on, somebody else to get better. So that model fit and was not like just me fooling myself. But
Mhm.
so I am a doctor, right? So let's do doctoring here. And in this kind of job, doctoring is very much needed. We need people who can identify what's going on, not get emotionally wrapped up in it, um, do doctoring.
Yeah.
So that's how I think of it. I don't think I'm BSing myself too much.
No, it's crazy. Like, even just thinking, because like you said, you started in the '80s, and has that number of like individuals over the years, because I feel like the whole talk around PTSD's become more prevalent, and I think easier to discuss. At least it seems like it. So has that number of like individuals coming up and or meeting you, or even, you know, going up, or they feel easy, like more confident saying, hey, I can sit down with somebody and talk about it, versus back in the 80s, 90s, maybe even early 2000s?
So yeah, early 2000s is a good kind of bridge point. I think after the early 2000s, the idea of being trauma informed, like all of us were more trauma informed by 2005-ish, you
Mhm.
know. Even the military, because I think it was in 2005 that they started doing post-deployment health assessments with PTSD screenings embedded in those, the PDHA. So, your crew who's been deployed will know those four letters. That's the one where everybody tells you to say no to everything.
That's exactly
So
how they
that you
do it,
don't
though.
get
You
in,
know,
your ass in a sling. So
there's a lot of stuff that happens like that, though, when you're in the military and you're like transitioning out or
yeah,
whatever the situation is. You're always told just say no, it's quicker, you get to go home faster.
yeah,
And I mean, I think majority of service members probably just do their 4 years. So let's just say on average
probably,
18 to 22 years old. You're
yeah,
still just dumb as hell, naive when you're getting out at 22. So, and you have a superior just saying, hey, just say no, just get out, go home, go to college. That's what you're going to do. And it's a detriment to yourself without even realizing that
yes,
you're hurting yourself.
yeah, yeah. Because then comes that forensic part of my job, which is finding evidence in the
Mhm.
record that something was going on. If there's something that somebody reports some years later, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of just say things in normal words, but so that's the forensic component of the VA benefits examiner job is um, connecting the dots between what's in the record and what somebody is talking about. And so if you've been saying no all along, you know, forensically you're not in a good spot.
Mhm.
Um, except that, and vets need to know this, that the VA has not made it forensically difficult for PTSD, combat related PTSD, anyways.
Okay. Because there's other traumas that are starting to become more prevalent. I've noticed that, like seeing just reports and people talking about it's like sexual assaults and all
Yeah.
those kinds of things are starting to
Yeah.
really like it seems like becoming the story, like the main conversation now. Not even just for women, but there's stories where men are getting the same thing, and it's crazy to think that, you know, these stories get brushed under the rug really quickly. You know, nobody
Yeah.
wants those leaked, and then somebody kills himself or whatever the case may be. And then now we start talking about it. It's kind of sad that that's happened. It makes you wonder how long that's been happening.
A
Almost.
long time. So, a
Yeah.
very long time. You know, uh, I think we want to believe that the military is exceptional from any other human group of people, group of
Yeah.
humans. We want to, and I think that there is, a very strong commitment to loyalty and honor. And, these are things that I do see a lot, which, uh, which is hard to, that's all we want to see. We only want to see the loyalty and the honor and the band of brothers.
Hmm.
But anywhere where humans have power, power corrupts, some, not
Oh
all,
yeah.
some.
Yeah, like I've talked about with even fellow veterans or fellow service members I was in the Navy with, and folks that I've talked to. It's like you see when you. I can remember even before I joined the Navy, everything's glamour. I can't even talk. Glamorized. You
Yeah.
know, you got your Top Guns, your all these sniper movies, the shows like Band of Brothers and Saving Private Ryan. So you don't see. It's like a. It's so it's like it's fake. It's not the reality of how it really is when you get there. There's the stuff in between working and running around and
Yeah.
taking orders that happens that nobody ever really talks about. And that's where you get those things where someone gets hurt, assaulted, forced to do something they don't want to do, and then they jump off the side of a ship, or they get home and
Right.
they kill themselves, and then everybody's like, well, we didn't know that was happening. Well, because you don't want to see it when you're in. Also, I think you're kind of trying to not see things when you're in. You don't want to believe it's happening, even if it is happening.
Well, thank you for saying that. And, I think let's look at families. Let's look at other institutions. It's like all the institutions have to look at themselves now.
Mm-hmm.
This is the part of me that's the doctor, and I've been to university, right? Stuff. So, I've worked with many institutions around this issue, or the survivors of the dark sides of institutions. So VA, again, forensically, VA has created a path to be service connected for sexual trauma during service. The National Center for PTSD is an excellent resource. People will connect with veteran service organizations in their community, and that's terrific and needs to happen. That's how I know a lot of people begin their process of reporting these kinds of events that have occurred. But the National Center for PTSD has some good resources on it for how does the VA see these things?
Mm-hmm.
So that website is the VA's website, and it's very accurate. If people want to get involved with the VA about these things. But so I could tell you like the 5 most common ways people get hurt from a traumatic stress perspective when they're in the service. The one we're all familiar with is combat, and not just like declared war, but things like things that happened in Haiti back in the 80s, and Kosovo, Herzegovina, being in those places where there was ethnic cleansing. And I probably should say trigger warning, or activator warning here. So it's that exposure to hostile enemy contact. So the second one, that's the next most commonly known nowadays, is sexual trauma. Very very painful when someone who's supposed to have your back intentionally injures you.
Yeah.
So the third one would be associated with that, and that would be like the hazing type scenarios.
Oh yeah.
Hazing that goes wrong.
Definitely a lot of that.
Yeah. These things are a lot, maybe alcohol related, things that go sideways, And, again, you look at other institutions, you look at the fraternities, sororities, so wherever you get 18 to 22-year-olds, we have, stuff happens, and it's sad. That's not to minimize it. That's just to say that's part of the reality here,
Yeah, it very much is. And it's funny, I used to joke about that when I got in the Navy. It's like, or got out and I started going to college. I was like, man, that was like my for going to college as 18-year-old, joining a frat. That's what it feels like looking back at it. It's like we did a lot of dumb stuff, but
yeah, thank God a lot of the dumb stuff doesn't go sideways.
luckily, luckily it doesn't.
So that, and then accidents, like work-related accidents in the Navy on flight decks. Wow, what a dangerous place to be, on a flight deck, on a moving flight deck, on a floating flight deck.
I was on a Nimitz, and it's that's a carrier, and it's intense up there. I mean, you don't realize it when you're doing it, but it's like we always joke about now. Some of us is like, man, we're only out of high school, running around up here.
No.
It's just so crazy the amount of trust they put in an 18-year-old kid, but no real
the billions
hands-on
of
training.
dollars of equipment. It's like in the hands of 18 to 20-year-old.
Yeah, pilots' lives even, because I worked in like the fuels and I'd be taking a fuel sample. It's like you're trusting me at 18 years old to know if this is a good sample of fuel, and you're a college graduate flying in a jet. Like that is just baffling when you think
I
about it.
think those stories need to be told. You know, that if I though okay, so things have surprised me doing this work. I should probably finish. What's the
Yeah.
fifth thing? So accidents. Oh, humanitarian missions.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So and maybe alongside of that would be rescue operations. You know,
Okay.
like Coast Guard rescue operations. Um, but humanitarian missions have been those have been the five primary things that people have talked about over the 15 years. I was surprised by the humanitarian missions, and once I started hearing them, it was sort of like, duh, of course.
Hmm.
You know, you're called in after the tsunami in Sri Lanka, and what do
Yeah.
you see? Right, what's going on there?
I
Yeah.
actually, yeah, had man, when did that happen? That was in that like 2009, 2010.
I That sounds about right. That what like the tsunami in
Yeah.
Sri Lanka area. Of course, we could Google it, but 11
I could,
maybe.
yeah, because I had some friends that volunteered to go on that deployment on the USS Reagan. I guess I can say I won't get in trouble. But
I know. There you go. Then the complication of security, national security, is
yeah, yeah.
minor.
Um, but I had some friends that were on there, and
Yeah.
they said, all the radiation they were exposed to, and like when the guy said he kicked a bird, like a seagull, and like exploded, and all this green stuff was coming out of it, and
Yeah.
they were like hosing them down every time they came off the flight deck, stripping them naked, hosing them down. I'm
Wow.
not sure if naked, so if I butcher that, I'm sorry, but I know they're hosing them down, putting their clothes,
Yeah.
and then having them sign waivers and stuff. And it's just that is
So, right.
crazy.
I just think these stories need to be told.
Hmm.
You know, I think what happens to the community is our young men and women, you know, go off to boot camp. And if we're their parent, we're like, that troublemaker is in a good place now. I've heard that story a bunch, but we don't know what y'all are doing.
Hmm.
And and the things you're responsible for at such a young age, like you said, fuel samples for planes that fly on and off of floating flight decks, and 18 and a half year old, you
Oh
know,
yeah,
person straight out of advanced training is is working the sample.
yeah. Like I've told my wife this story before, and I mean, guys that I worked with in the QA lab know it. But I took a sample from a jet head that had landed, and the pilot was coming out, and I was taking it, and all this like fungus and stuff was floating in it. I was like, "Holy crap!" I looked and I was like, "Sir, you're lucky you made it back. Like, I don't know how you made it without your fuel lines like getting clogged up
Right.
or freezing." And it's crazy that yeah, you're talking like that, 18 and a half years old, that type of responsibility, and having now reporting that, and it's like, "Oh, okay, they found this fuel sample. Now we got to flush this jet." It's like, man, you're listening to me at the end of the day, these officers and
Yeah.
chiefs and higher ups, and I'm just some kid that joined right out of high school. It's
Yeah.
kind of wild.
Yeah. 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 And right. So the youth, the youngness of our service members, that was the first thing that I became aware of at the VA in 95, 96. So
Hmm.
to show my age, I was 30 something at the time, 35. Yeah, 35. I was a little older going into my PhD program, but I did the PhD because I wanted to know more so I could do more. You know,
Hmm.
I am the egghead stuck back home, so happy to happy to be that person. But so when I was at the VA talking to guys, Vietnam guys were like in their mid 40s at the time. And probably were coming to the VA because they had lost a relationship or weren't in touch with their kids, or, and then I would start talking to them in private settings. And I eventually started asking, how old were you when you were there? Yeah, that's where it started for me. I was like,
Yeah.
how old were you? And the fact that, because I had seen my cousin go off to Vietnam when he was 18, barely 19, but I was like 12. So he seemed like an old guy to me at the time. But at 35, I was well aware that 18 is not old. And now you're in a platoon walking through a jungle. So I became very aware of the youth, and that from a PTSD perspective, technically speaking, this is where my brain work and PTSD work comes together, because our brains at 18 are still forming.
Oh yeah.
We haven't settled into our grown brain. No offense, 18-year-olds, but it's somewhere like in our mid 20s, our brains kind of settle into just the maturity of the brain. So here we are at 18, 19, 20, introducing these extreme risk experiences, and that alters how the brain develops. A grown person would have less reactivity than a young person, from a brain perspective. So youth is important in so many, in that way as well. Yeah.
Now, we ask a lot of the young men and women that join the military. How, like you said too, I think a lot of parents are happy. They're like, oh, good. Or maybe not happy, but they're like somewhat relieved, like, oh, you're joining something, you're becoming part of something that's structured. But yeah, the details in there, like you're saying, joining a platoon, now you're getting shot at, you got bombs going off, somebody next to you is gets hurt or dies, you get hurt. It's a lot to try to carpet. I mean, I can't not talk today. Like rationalize, I guess.
I think compartmentalize is the word that you're.
Yes, thank you.
Which is a effective strategy, but when it's these sort of extreme exposures, breaks my heart. Actually, now I'm an old lady. Now I'm 63, and I've been at this for a while, and you get a certain perspective about what we are charging our youth to do, and then what we expect from them after they're done. And so the gap between how some of our service members are coming out of service and what's available for them, it was just too broad. Let me say that another way. I came online. I wrote the book PTSD Unplugged. I came online because I did not see that kind of bridge available in the world, in the United States. Examiners like myself are not out on social media. We're longer in the tooth, and you guys move at the speed of digital communication. I love it. But I have kids the age of my kids are grown, as I said, and they're the same age as so many people who served overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan. 20-year war, for crying out loud. And there's just a gap between what would be useful to them coming out of the service and what's available. Even the question, I started asking the question, have you ever read anything about PTSD or listened to anything about PTSD? And the answer was consistently no. And so I wrote the book based on what I said after that. Well, this is what we know about PTSD now. It's what we know about trauma memory and the impact on the polyvagal system and what's going on in the amygdala. And, it's like, here, let me tell you in a veteran friendly way, what's going on in your head, right now because of trauma exposure. And that's how I wrote this book. Well, this book.
Awesome.
That's this is the old cover. I still have about 50 of these I can give away for nothing, but we made a new cover, and that's the one that people will find on Amazon. That'll be the link, in the podcast. But I wrote the book just writing out the kind of conversations that I'd been having with vets for a while. I wrote it in 2019. So this was 6 years after my 2013 event, and really the book was born out of my friends saying, you're talking about this, my people, my support people. It's like, they're like, you need to write this book. And for like maybe a year and a half, I was like, I am not writing a damn book. It's not happening. And then, and then I just did. I ended up having certain time available to me because of how things were working out. And a good friend of mine is an editor. So she edited my book, but she's like was a professional editor. I brought her out of retirement, to edit my book. And she likes to say, her name's Lynn, and she likes to say that she cut out all the verbosity and repetitiveness.
Oh, that's funny.
Right, it is. So this is how thin this book is. All right. This is about as thin a book on Pete. It's more like a pamphlet than a book. Right. Anyway, that's
useful though. I think that's a good point because I know I haven't read up on PTSD. The only time I ever really hear about it is when other people talk about it. It's probably a great idea to, read something about it, getting a general idea of like, okay, this is where I'm at and I can relate to something that you've written or whatever it may be. Yeah. And at least get the ball rolling in the right direction. Like acknowledging that, hey, there's some steps out there and I can actually do this. And I mean, we get over it, but feel better.
Yeah, she made me include an extra chapter on, like developing a strategy to get better. So chapter 10 is because after I wrote chapters 2 through 9, actually chapter 1 is written by somebody I met along the way. Her name is Cindy Matthews, and she is the granddaughter of Captain Chet Matthews, who jumped out of a plane on D-Day. And and then managed post-traumatic stress symptoms his entire life, of course.
But they didn't call that back then, correct?
No, that was World War II, so we called it battle fatigue. Yeah.
It's crazy how it's like evolved over time because even my grandpa was in the Navy and I talked to him and he'll say the same things like, oh, we didn't complain, we just sucked it up. And it's like, well, I mean, I'm sure you had some rough times, going through those experiences and stuff like that. And like I think about the Vietnam vets, I feel like that's where the conversation might have started. I'm not too sure. But,
yep, it did. It did actually. 1980, the diagnosis got in the manual. Sorry, I have to plug in here. Silly me. Yeah. Anyway, the history of the diagnosis is an interesting history, but our history of knowing that combat affects people goes back forever.
Yeah, because you feel like there's terms like shell shock and all these different things, but it kind of makes me wonder too, with PTSD being like maybe an easier conversation to have with individuals. Do you see like more of the older vets, the Vietnam vets, coming up now and talking about?
Well, the way the culture of the military, the culture of the veteran, will say these memories are with me forever.
Mhm.
And then so that for the older vet who's like in my age cohort and older, they're hard and firm on that.
Oh, oh.
And, but for the younger vet, they're like, I do not want these memories to go on forever. So there's a way now, mid like 2005-ish, like we were talking about earlier. So the veteran coming out, maybe the millennial veteran,
Mhm.
is part of our post, what we call in like the post trauma world, the post trauma informed world. So what we know now is that this does PTSD in its like medical form doesn't have anything to do with whether you should suck it up or not suck it up. It's a
Mhm.
neuropsychological thing. It's something that we can see happening where there's a trauma memory that rotates. Um, it's kind of moment in time, frozen in time is what that's how I like to say. And this bubble of a memory seems to be stuck in the amygdala, which is, I'll just give you my summary here. It's stuck in the amygdala, which is like the relay center for the senses of our lives. So we experience our life, you and I, you in your space, me in my space, and we experience our lives: sight, sound, smell, taste, and kind of the feels. Like it's a little warm in my office this morning. So that's the feel. Like if you were in Afghanistan, you have a dry desert feel. If you were in Vietnam, um, you have a lagoon kind of a
Mhm.
feel. So so that all the senses come to the amygdala, and then the amygdala decides what needs to happen next. If it's dangerous, then the amygdala kind of shuts down parts of our brain, the front of our brain, the relational portion of our brain. It actually, if there's danger, the timestamp portion of our brain is not working.
Oh, wow.
That's a neurological thing that's just happened. And the amygdala says to the fight, flight, freeze part of our brain, get busy, there's a problem. Right. So then we get busy, there's a problem. And you guys are trained for problems. My God, like the repetitive, training for how to respond to certain situations, that muscle memory that you learn to be so successful in crisis, which there are a lot of crises that go on in war or on the, like, as we said, on the deck of a ship. And so that's why you're trained in emergency services, so that when your amygdala says, hey, you guys, let's get going, you know what to do. You have muscle memory that takes over. So thank you for your service, for crying out loud.
Mhm.
That's,
Yeah.
yeah. So what happens in PTSD is that moment in time, all those senses get stuck. And then when they're activated by whatever's going on in our world right now. So if I smell something, if I see fireworks, or I hear a noise, I don't know
Mm,
what it is, that memory pops open. And
that's
then
interesting.
again, activates that fight, flight, the post traumatic stress symptoms, activates PTS symptoms, and you're back defending and protecting and wondering why the hell you just ducked under the table, because, yeah, yeah. So that's the brief PTS from a neuropsychological perspective. There is no sucking it up there. There's no need to
Mm.
stay in that repetitive motion, but it we do have ways to get out of that, but it's a whole new way of thinking about what's happening with PTSD. It's
Yeah.
not a weakness, it's an injury.
I think that's a hard thing to even accept as a veteran, or I mean, it could be, I guess, anybody, is that admitting that something's wrong and then
Yeah.
trying to face it. Because I think that happens in in society in general. You know, a lot of people don't want to. They know there's an issue, and it's like, I don't want to deal with it. I'll deal with it later. I'm just gonna pretend it doesn't exist. But then years go by, maybe weeks, months, whatever it is, and it surfaces up, and something bad happens. You do something bad, and I think it's not more courageous, but it's just as courageous to admit that there's an issue that you have, you know.
I think we rightfully think it's gonna get better.
Hmm.
Most things get better,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, most of the time. We get over things, or we're able to put them in compartments, like you said, and like you guys who do this kind of work, you're better at putting things in compartments than somebody like me, who's like, all my compartments are connected by feeling wires. It's like, it's not happy for me, but it's part of being empathetic. I'm okay with that, but for you guys, it's like those boxes are really separate. That's something I accept now as a true thing. So
Yeah, it's really hard. I can just think to my experience and like those I've talked to. It's when you it's like a weird thing because I've brought up before. It's like, man, like you're saying, we're so well trained on how to handle things and overcome things, and we get out and we just like panic when it comes to certain situations. And it's the weirdest things, like all that training, all those experiences that we had to push through a difficult situation, we let
Mhm.
it get the better of us when we're out. I'm not sure why that happens, but it's just like the weirdest thing. Like looking back now, I mean, I've been out for I think 11 years. And looking back to when I first got out, it's like, God, I couldn't handle any situation when I first got out. I just felt like I was always on eggshells, and going to college right when I got out, I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere, and I just hated everybody. I hated myself. And it's like, man, that same person 3 years prior was having the time of his life on a flight deck. And it's crazy how that happens.
I think it's how you're built,
Hmm.
like you're kind of more working as a team, working in risk situations. I can only know by the contrast. I
Hmm.
don't mind sitting here and having this conversation with you, and I could do it like 80 times. I don't mind. I don't mind the sitting and having the conversation. It's how I'm built.
Hmm.
I like it about myself. It brings me meaning. This job has brought me so much meaning, just from being able to understand this whole bubble pattern activation. It is so patterned that it's fascinating to me.
Hmm.
And of course, it's so unique to each person. So I'm not saying it's not, special to how each person goes through it. But you all are like, put me on a damn team and let me accomplish a goal, and I do better. So I don't, is maybe there's some way to help veterans stay on in a team focus once you're out. I know there are some embedded veteran organizations on campuses that
Yeah.
operate from that perspective.
Yeah, a lot of colleges will have. I know when I went to community college before I went to my 4-year college, it was like that. They had like a veteran center where they had like games and like a lounge.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like I never went to it. I was just one of those arrogant veterans. But there's a lot of veterans that are like that, like, oh, I don't want to go hang out, and like, because I think part of it is like the way I kind of viewed it as like I've already done that part of my life. Or do I want to go back into it?
Oh, right, right.
I'm not sure if that's how what happens to other people, other veterans. But I felt like, okay, I have my friends that I still talk to that I was in. We're really close, and I was like, do I really want to go hang out and I don't know what are we going to do? Share feelings, tell stories, reminisce, and it's like, um, but
Yeah,
looking back,
no,
it's like I
that
wish I
makes a
would
lot
have.
of sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it's looking back, I wish I would have gone in there. It's it probably would have helped a lot more than than anything than I initially thought, instead of letting these things linger, linger, and linger. At least you can build some bonds and some camaraderie with some folks and, find something in common. Um, but yeah, it is part of that team thing. I think that's a large part of it when you get out and you wake up and you're by yourself and it's like, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
That next morning's weird.
I don't think it's a whole lot different for the civilian,
Mhm.
especially, again, the civilian who is like you know, hate to say like the guy or something, but the civilian that has that same mentality because, at some point, this our culture is so individualistic.
Mhm.
We have to push off the dock by ourselves. And, that moment when we're transitioning to pushing off the dock by ourselves is, more or less of a struggle for everybody, you know, depending on personal factors,
Mhm.
how to facilitate that. It's the structure of the military is so useful because you have a place to live, you have food, not very good food, not a very good place to live. but you,
Very true.
but you have those things. It's like if you want to go eat that stuff in the decaf or something, but or the defac, but uh, so many there are the pattern of people who get lost after service. Um, is that do you know is that a higher percentage for service members than like general public making that transition?
That's a good question. I don't know if it is, but I mean, I'm not gonna say I wouldn't be surprised because I think that happens a lot. Um, just from folks I've talked to and know, it's like you get out and yeah, you are kind of alone, so you do feel lost. Like there's this one time I'll never forget this. I was working at Lowe's when I first got out of the Navy. I was going to college. I was working at Lowe's, and there's this young guy. Well, I was young too, but he just got out of the army, and he like just lost it and started hitting the vending machines and going crazy. And everybody's like, "What the hell's wrong with this guy?" Like,
Mhm.
but I knew he had been in the army, so I was like, well, after he left, I was like, hey, he was in the army, like who knows what he's going through, But
Mhm.
how
Mhm.
lonely is that to where
Mhm.
you're going through something? And I think this is part of how probably how a lot of veterans do get lost because you come out, you're trying to work a job, but something happens like that, and nobody's there to ask you what's going on. Nobody's like, hey, what's going on with you? Like, why are you doing that? They just point and like kind of scared of you. What the hell's wrong with him or her? There's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
sympathy. So you feel like, oh, nobody cares about me. So then that's how you slip through the cracks. You don't go get the help you need or reach out to family or friends, whoever it is that could possibly help. And you end up on the streets.
Because there might be a trauma exposure in service that's behind it. Because people don't just behave
Yeah.
that way without some reason. Why are we not more sympathetic? But instead, the stigma pulls in, crazy, he's a veteran. Oh, you crazy veterans. It's
Hmm.
like, wow, we like community, this civilian community really quickly goes to that conclusion and then says, you better here's the VA card, and then, oh, thanks for the VA referral. I had, it's not something I've thought of before,
Oh, yeah.
so,
Oh,
but
and then,
why do we have that stigma? And this again is why I'm out here on social media, why I wrote that book. That book's not just for veterans, but it's for their family members too, because it
mm,
describes these, this thought process, this how does how does combat really impact somebody? The fact that this doesn't just fade over time. If there's a traumatic stress exposure that's led to, disturbing dreams or thoughts that come in without, just like quickly come into mind. Um, it doesn't fade over time. And
Hmm.
so it's just become so wearisome to have these horrible, vivid memories replay and replay. And if you haven't experienced it, you don't really understand what it's like. I think that much is true. I wouldn't say, you don't have to experience combat to know how wearisome combat memories can be. I've been 8,500, I've been hearing, I understand because they all have been telling me, I've been seeing it on them. So and then to have the assumption by the civilian community that they're broken.
Hmm.
Mm. They're injured. So we have some injured people out there. And hopefully we're going to start, transition to do a better job.
Exactly. There's a lot of that, it goes around like, oh, maybe we can help him with this, and it never happens, and or whatever the case may be. And like you brought the idea of a family member or even a friend, like reading like a book such as yours, and understanding
Yeah.
maybe some symptoms, or maybe even understanding like, okay, that individual just did that. My son or daughter, just from what they're telling me, it sounds like they're going through something that I've read about. And
Yeah.
it I had talked to actually Mark, that I had on here, Mark Stefanshian, about this. Veterans typically don't share stuff with family members also, I feel like, because like I think he had say, we don't want to put the burden on them to fix us, like.
Yeah.
And that's is that the right thing to do? Maybe not, who knows? I don't know. um but I think it's not a bad thing to do that, admit to somebody in your family, like, this is what I'm going through. And I think we just think they're going to instantly panic and try to fix us.
I think that anyway, I'll weigh in because I think that the civilian community needs to bear the burden of war.
Mm. Well, yeah, I never thought of it like that. That's yeah.
But just going for the gusto on that one. So
Yeah.
that's why Cindy wrote the second chapter in my book, because she is the only family member who stuck with her grandfather
Well,
who
that's
jumped out of a plane at Normandy and then marched across Europe, into the Netherlands, which was not an easy march at the time. That was not a day march. So,
wow.
and he was a captain. So he struggled with whether to lead his troops off of a hill or onto the next route, or like when it's a good story. It's his story of what happened to his squad or perhaps platoon on D-Day, and how they got caught behind, sort of between the beach and the enemy, which is where
Oh,
that's where our jumped. What do you call them? Sorry, I'm blanking. Our airborne. That's where our airborne landed on D-Day. So she was the family member who stuck with them, and even though he remained married till he passed, the marriage was not strong.
mhm.
So our families are so affected and bear the burden of war anyways. And so I think, come on, y'all guys, we need to get together and do war recovery better. That's
Yeah.
also why I'm out here.
No,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
like that. I never
Yeah.
thought of it like that, but it's very true. I mean, we send our daughters, our sons off to wars and come back and expect them to be just fine, you know. And that's not the case,
And we're in
obviously.
a post-trauma informed world. So what are we thinking?
Yeah.
I honestly, people in my office saying to me that they tried not to be changed by war, and then just you want to see me like get choked up right now. So That is the hardest thing to see, is somebody who really did not want to be changed by war. But how can you not be? How can you
Hmm.
not be?
Yeah, I've had like there's a story, or one of my friends from high school. He had joined. I think he joined the Marines, if I remember right. And if I might be messing up his story, but I believe he drove tanks. And I remember just him vaguely saying one time I was hanging out with him, that he's like, he didn't really want to talk about anything, but he's like, it's weird when you hear bullets bouncing off your tank, and he's like, you don't know what you're running over, you're just driving,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and that's all he really said. So it's like,
yeah.
and that's fresh out of high school, and
Tank drivers become truck drivers, and then the rocks pinging off their trucks sound like shots pinging off the tank. And now, trigger warning.
it's like, yeah,
Yeah,
you become changed. You're uh,
yeah.
like, how do you ever go back to being the person you were before you join after experiencing anything like that? Yeah,
So I think we need to really develop some rigorous detoxing on these things,
hmm
this detoxing this, trauma memory. So people still look at me and like I'm crazy when I say that that's doable. But, honest to God, if people didn't get better from this, I'd have done something else with my entire life. Come on.
Oh man, oh that's funny. Um,
Thanks for having me on. It's been very cathartic.
no, I appreciate it. It's been good because it's a different perspective, because I've always just had veterans on, so it's nice to have somebody who's invested in it as much as you are, and trying to figure out, exactly how this works and how to make it better. What can we do to make it better?
Yeah.
Um, have that conversation, because that's the first step, I believe, is being able to just have the conversation, whether no matter what branch you're in. I had an individual say one time, he's like, we got to stop like comparing sticks when it comes to our experiences. We all went through different things.
Yeah.
My trauma is not worse than your trauma. It's still
Right.
trauma.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And I think that happens a lot as well. You hear somebody talk about individuals dying or getting severely hurt, and I'm like, oh man, I was on the carrier. Nobody got really hurt,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know.
Good.
I can't sympathize, but our experiences are vastly different. Doesn't mean anything different. I mean, it still impacts that individual, however it impacts them. So,
That's right. That is absolutely right. And what I'm glad about is actually that people are reporting now
hmm
at lesser severity. It still is taking like an average of 10 years post deployment to report.
oh, I
Yeah.
could see that being true.
Yeah.
I could definitely see that.
People want to see, like first it's going to go away. Second, I'm going to compartmentalize this. Third, my spouse is an idiot. That's why everything's going, it's like you go through all these things are normal. We all go through this stuff. I don't care who you are. You learn as you grow, and then you get to a point where you're like, oh damn, everywhere I go the same thing is going on. So maybe it's me.
Oh
Maybe
yeah.
this isn't going to go away. And that's where you guys, the younger generation, is like, oh hell no, I'm not going to do this the rest of my life. And so I think it's time for us to, like, on my side, like in this chair, show up
hmm
and do better.
I could. I mean,
Yeah.
as much as it's like, that's why I liked how you said, civilians need to own the burden of war too.
Yeah.
Because we come home and who's there for us, and I think that's like what you're doing, such it's so important, because there's a lot of that emptiness, and nobody there, it seems lonely, so it's nice to have individuals
Yeah.
such as yourself saying, hey, you served us, now let us serve you, in
Yeah.
a sense, um, instead of young men and women coming home and being left to fend for themselves, because like you said, I think it takes about 10 years to kind of get your act together, so to speak. Like
Mhm.
I've been pretty open with mine. It was a few years ago. Like I had one of those rough nights where I was writing letters to myself and my family members. And then the next morning I woke up and I looked in the mirror and I was like, what the hell am I doing? Like I had I don't know what happened overnight, but I just looked at myself and,
Awesome.
and
Yeah,
I
it happened.
always,
Yeah, makes
yeah. And I
sense.
always think back to, I've told my wife this before. I look back to that individual, 17, 18 years old, who was so excited to join the military. And I'm looking at myself now. How would that young teenager or old teenager view of me right now? He'd be like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, what happened to
Mhm.
that excitement, the joy to go see the world and do all these things? You've just become like a shell of yourself.
Mm.
And luckily, I mean, I feel like I'm probably one of the few lucky ones I've had those moments out. It is, I don't know how to describe it, but it really woke me up. And ever since then, I probably been the happiest I've been. Don't stress the small stuff, so to speak, as it's so
Yeah,
easy to do,
yeah.
regardless if you're a veteran or just a civilian. Going through life.
There's so many like crossovers. So
Hmm.
yeah. Um, I I do think that the civilian community has come up short in terms of sharing the burden of war
Hmm.
for a bunch of since World War II, maybe. Well, I don't know. We're growing. Everybody, we're all growing. So we did have words for this before. We've had words for PTSD since medical words since the Civil War when we called it soldier's heart.
Oh,
Interesting. I like that title actually.
yeah.
And but it, of course, over focuses on combat. This is about violence exposure and severe risk exposure and danger exposure. So it's more broad than that. And but the community, we don't have features in our modern community to welcome a warrior back home, or do we have ceremonies? Do we have we had marches at some point. We had
Hmm.
parades. That was something, but we don't have parades anymore. And some small towns will have a parade when a member comes home, and they do a better job than but in a big city, you come back to a borough in New York City, there's no parade for you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then nobody cares what you did. you
nobody
know
cares. Yeah.
and that's a hard pill to swallow as well. like
Yeah.
I've
We
heard
went
that from.
through like 8 versions of iPhone while this war was going on. We got a lot on our minds
Oh,
right now.
that's no, that's so true. I remember when I was, man, I think it was right before on deployment, the first iPhone came out. Now we're like on iPhone freaking 20 something. I feel like I don't know what it is. It's insane.
I
Like,
know.
damn, the time goes by so fast, or they're just cranking them out. I don't.
It's all a conspiracy to get us to spend another $1,000, so
Oh yeah, for that extra camera on your phone.
for the extra, yeah. Which
Man.
I don't even know how to use, again, but
Yeah, I
hopefully.
keep the same phone till it stops working. I've had the same one for like 6 years. It works. I don't know.
I gotta admit, I try to keep a better phone than my sons. I try to always have the best phone in the family. That's kind of a goal.
Show off when they come over. Like, look,
Yeah.
I'm more techie than you. That's awesome. Oh man.
Yeah. Shh, don't tell them. Oh God, it's a public setting.
Uh,
You're getting the Saturday, Dr. Pam. This is
hey, I actually got sleep in today, so this is probably the most awake I've been in weeks with no kids in the house. So
Oh
just happened
wow.
to be sick though to top it off. So
Oh
it's like I finally got sleep, but now I'm sick and feel like crap. But it's like, God, it's just never ending. It feels like.
welcome to living. I know. I just flew in yesterday. I was in Illinois for 3 days. I've been working the mobile medical unit for QTC, which is the coolest program they have, because like VA requires that clinic be available within 100 miles of where they live, of their home address. So QTC put together like this program. They have 18 RVs decked out as medical clinics. I mean, that's a whole nother level of detail of stuff, but it's so fun. And I'm there as the psychologist doing the, psych exams. And so I was staying in a Best Western Plus in Centralia, Illinois, the last 3 days, and just flew in last night. So I'm like on Central Time Zone. So
Yeah, the
think
2 hour difference.
the 2 hour difference. But that's a pretty cool thing to be asked to do. So fly out to these mobile medical units and provide services in small town USA. Really fun. And, again, meaningful, just meeting different people with different ways of living, even here in the United States, but, across the continental United States. And I've been up in Alaska doing these exams. And, so it's the same everywhere, man. The distance between the veteran and the community is just profound. It's not right, and that gap needs to be bridged, shrink. The ability to recover from this war, people are going home with, war on the heart and getting lost in the shuffle. And so, yeah, I think that has just firmed up my commitment to working, in these kind of ways. Extracurricular,
Well, I mean, it's needed. I think certainly it needs to happen. And I mean, I've noticed there's like veteran housing developments or like little apartments out here in Southern California being built and stuff like that. And it's like, I don't know if I want to say finally it's happening, but better late than never, I guess. Is that these things are being built to keep veterans off the streets.
Yeah.
Because that's always the saddest part to me when I see, like, if they're veteran, I don't know. I just assume they are when they have their signs up, asking for anything. And like you said, it's almost like society's just failed them. They come home and they're just left to their own, And it's sad. It's sad to see. I always wish there was something like, man, like, could I just like pick you up and clean you up and hopefully get you a job? I'm not sure if that's the right thing you need. I don't even know how you ended up here, but it's sad to see him there with no family. It's like that's somebody's son or husband, father. It breaks my heart.
I think it's part of a more broad family system, community system failure, and we do, like, we owe our vets a debt because of that oath. I've never sworn to give my life for my country. I don't know. I haven't done it. I don't think it's gonna happen, but you all do it. You all make that choice. So maybe you're young and at the time, but you did it. And it was voluntary. And so the civilian community, I think, has lost the value in that, lost a sense of valuing that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because you always hear like, well, you decided to do that. Like you made that choice. I've heard that plenty of times, and they like hold that against, like, as a negative thing. Like, well, I didn't do it, but you decided to do it, so I don't feel bad for you. You made that choice. Yeah. It's like, okay, but
once you make that choice, you have no more choices until you discharge.
That's one of those things you don't realize until you're in it, and you have to be at a certain place at a certain time. You have to wake up at a certain time. You have to dress a certain way. You have to shave every day. Your haircut needs to look a certain way. It's like,
and why? Because you have to move as a team.
Yeah.
Everything that the military does, you move as a team. And so the team has to No individuality in the team. The team has to move forward.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I think we need to have smart conversations about this and gut level conversations about this. And I appreciate the podcast community. Look, I was with a vet yesterday. You know what? I don't really talk about individual veterans, but just to say, this is actually a conversation I have many times with vets in these little rooms where people talk about stuff
Mhm.
to me about what happened and what they want for themselves. And, uh, I tell vets about the podcast community. I'm like, you want to hear people talk about this stuff? Go to the podcast community, because you'll hear what you're needing to hear. I appreciate your podcast and the podcast of like Drive Along and Drive Ahead podcast. Oh,
Yeah, there's some
I
good
just
ones
murdered
out
the
there.
name of his podcast. Jenna with the Millennial Veteran podcast, Crack Up, and
Oh
also
yeah.
does, yeah.
Yeah, hers is
And
good.
also very serious, So,
Yeah, I like hers a lot. And then, yeah, there's so many out there. There's some that talk about strictly business, like how to take advantage of VA benefits and
yeah,
loans and stuff. And it's like those are all things you're kind of numb to or unaware of when you get out. So I've listened to a few like that. I can't remember. God, I listened to it a lot. I can't remember the name of the
yeah.
podcast.
Well,
But
there's so much like on YouTube or, the ads. If you were at Camp Lejeune, da, 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 da. So, I mean, I appreciate the outreach, but I'm also like, there's so much more than, file your claim and, get $100 million,
Mhm.
and whatever. So I work in that community, but you Drive On podcast is the name of, sorry, cleared up in my brain. So these are great. His brother passed in the war,
Oh man.
so I tell these guys about, and gals, about these outreaches. The gals, the people with the sexual trauma stuff. Um, there's the community of people who are supportive on Instagram in particular is terrific. So I'm on like 4 platforms, but Instagram is the only place I talk to veterans. Honestly, y'all
Yeah.
are on Instagram. I love it. And I'm not going on TikTok, but
Oh yeah. I
yeah,
can't do TikTok. I tried and
yeah,
it's like I don't know about this one. Like I don't know. This algorithm's a little wonky. I don't know about it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's some good podcasts out there, and there's some great veterans out there that are willing to talk about their stories and experiences. And like I know one of the newer topics that's come up recently too is just like the burn pits and cancers and um,
Yeah, the PACT Act and, you
yeah.
know, yeah. And all those things are great. And service connection is is a deserved, it's an entitlement, but there's, you have to go through the process, which is forensic. And that proving the links to things, proving the nexus, as they say. I could come on a podcast and talk all about, what a nexus means, in mental health. But honestly, I would rather be talking about how to get your boots on your ground and, move your life forward.
Hmm.
To, recognizing what you have going on, recognizing the injuries that you have, but really moving forward, um, and finding that next step of meaning in your life. What are you going to be when you grow up? You know? So I'm 63, still defining that, and like happy that I have options and that my life keeps, evolving as they say, because we're always, what's the next challenge?
Hmm. Yeah, that's
I,
true.
yeah,
And I know a lot of veterans have brought that up, finding their purpose when they get out. Because when you're in, or you join, you feel up this sense of purpose. And then you get out. And like you said, you got to find that purpose or that thing that drives you still every day, or not, maybe not even every day, but you just got to find a goal to go after,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of keep your brain in a positive mindset, because if you don't have those aspirations, that's when you sit, you dwell, and you start hurting yourself or thinking negative
Yeah, the
things.
woe
And
is me things start, we
Mhm.
don't do good with ourselves that way. But did you know that Vietnam veterans kind of built, like Korea and Vietnam veterans built the freeway system in the United States?
I did not know
So,
that.
yeah, so things that, that's probably overstating it, but when I would ask just in a, when you like do all kind of these evaluations, you're like, what did you do when you came home from Vietnam? And like a whole bunch of these guys say that they worked on construction on the 105, so I'm in the Los Angeles area. So like, or I built I was part of the crew that built these towers in downtown. Like there are things that our vets do that are incredible. Yeah, I've talked to the, the people who built these things, who are part of the construction crews.
That's
So
crazy.
yeah, so he's still serving. And so many vets come home and serve as law enforcement, first responders, fire department, and stuff,
Hmm.
because it's teamwork, and it's good work,
Yeah.
risky work. And, like it's good. There's so much meaning that people derive from these kind of jobs when they get out of the service. And those stories need to be told too.
They do. I think I've talked about before. I had a gentleman on who went to law enforcement and stuff, and he said it's the transition for him doing that was easier or felt easier because it's maybe not the same exact thing, obviously, but there's some similarities. You got your camaraderie
Hmm.
with your sheriff's office or whatever it is, your deputies, and but they do go through a lot of stuff as well, and I don't think that's one of those stories that nobody really talks about. What an
Hmm.
officer, CSI individuals, first responders go through, and just day to day things. I'm sure they go through a lot of mental fatigue and PTSD type events, and
Hmm.
like I've the older I've gotten, I've really given them their kudos because I couldn't do it. I couldn't run into a fire, go to a crime scene where somebody's been shot, and then go home that same day. There's just no way. Like to absorb that what you just saw, and then go home and have a family and go about your daily life. Like that got to be some of the most challenging aspects of a job that you can have without being in the military. Like I don't know how folks
Yeah.
do that.
Uh, it's a lot, but thinking about how I made this transition, this thinking of myself as an exploratory surgeon,
Mhm.
would kind of make me think that I do know that people in law enforcement, first responder status, develop a certain way of approaching the job, so that they can go home at night. But we also need to recognize that traumatic stress events in a moment in time can create a trauma memory that then rotates in a vivid way. So I keep going back to that because this is not like coping with the horrible stuff like that. There's coping with what you see. And then there's a traumatic stress injury, which is an injury. And it creates a neuropsychological bubble, is how I best think of it.
Mhm.
And so just like carrying a 70-pound rucksack over uneven dirt is going to give you a backache. You do this traumatic stress enough, you're going to end up with the bubble. And there are things we can do about it, and we need to get better at doing things about it along the way, and not making that a make or break in terms of employment. So
Mhm.
that's a whole nother layer of this discussion.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, yeah,
Oh man. Well,
yeah, yeah. So anyway, I do this for a living. It's,
Well, it's needed, you know, it really is. I think we need more folks like yourself out there who are willing to make the leap to help individuals that are going through whatever they're going through, whatever traumas they've experienced, and help
yeah,
them share their stories, get that off their chest. Um, regardless of how emotional it is and hard it is to hear. I mean, kudos to you to be able to do that for such a long time.
yeah.
'Cause I can see how that could be just really hard to do. I mean, 8,500 people, that's a lot of folks right there.
So
So
my best friend called it about a few years ago, and she said, "You have meltdown Thursday. Every Thursday, you melt down." And so, so that's now become the known thing around my life. It's like on Thursdays, I come home and I'm like, nobody gets to have any feelings at all.
no, that's funny. Don't want to
Yeah,
hear single complaint, nothing.
yeah, that's
That's
right.
funny.
No, nothing. I want to have a nice dinner and watch some television. No feelings, no Hallmark TV around my house. No.
Yeah, specifically home. Yeah, that could be that channel right there. That's a good one.
Oh yeah, maybe I'm not supposed to say that stuff on but yeah, yeah. Give me something lighthearted and probably irreverent, and that's going to be me on a Thursday night. You know.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to thank you again. Man, we're cranking out here. This is a fast hour and a half. Um, yeah, so I want to thank you again for coming on, taking the time out of your Saturday, and you know, sharing what you do and how long you've been doing it, and the impact you're making on the veteran community is amazing. It's nice to know somebody's out there doing stuff like that, and going out of their way to help other individuals.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's I think we need more of that in just general, regardless of what it is. We just need to help each other out more.
I
Um,
agree.
yeah.
But like you guys, you say thank you for your service to you guys, and you guys like to say thank you for your support. And so I'll just say what I say: thank you for my freedom, and serious, serious that without the service of our military, we're not the country that we are, and there's bad things go on and military put into play in situations that I don't agree with, that other people don't agree with, but I will always support the military. I will support you guys,
Mhm.
and hope for the best in our leadership, making smart decisions. But you guys deserve all of our support. And so thank you for our freedom that I can sit in my house and not worry about a rocket attack here. You know,
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, actually, given the insanity that can go on in places. So,
Oh yeah. Yeah, we're seeing that today, I guess you can say, So
yeah,
yeah, we're pretty lucky, It's it's yeah, it's a country built on young men and women's backs, So
yes, sir.
definitely lucky for those individuals. So
Yes, yeah.
cool.
Really nice talking with you. Thanks for sharing your space with me today.
No
Yes,
problem. Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you for coming on. Yeah, again, really appreciate it. Um, yeah, I couldn't be more happy to have somebody like yourself on. It's a different perspective, and it's much needed to be
if you
out there.
haven't read a book on PTSD, here's one. I
Yeah,
need to
everybody
get
check
better
it
at
out.
selling my books. So there you go. And I probably this year I'll put it on audio tape. So
Okay.
I know
Awesome.
I know that would be useful. So
Well, all righty. You enjoy the rest of your weekend, and
thank you.
yeah, best of luck out there. Keep doing what you're doing. It's greatly appreciated.
Thanks. And you two have a good weekend. And hope you don't feel too bad this
Nothing will get better. I'm
Yeah.
dying now.
All right.
All righty. You have a good one.
Take care.
You too.
Bye.